българския превод. Много се радвам, че има... Yeah, okay. I'm glad there is interest in today's topic on travelogues. I guess we are all, in a way, either travelers or travelers to be, or writers to be. We'll be speaking in English today, courtesy of our Croatian guest. We can also try Croatian, but and also courtesy of Thomas McGonigal, who is our second or the other writer in residence for this month in the Literature and Translation House. I hope that if English is a problem, if my English is a problem to anyone, please raise your hand and feel free to correct my English at any point. I'm really happy to welcome Екатерина and Dинko at today's conversation. For us, this was kind of a risky topic. It's for the first time in this space here that we will be talking about perhaps a bit more of a popular form of literature. But I have to tell you that for those of you for whom this is the first time at the Literature House, this used to be the working space of the prominent Bulgarian painter Nenko Balkanski. And downstairs, in our little documentary exhibition, you can also see a kind of travel walks of his, in the form of articles he was sending back to Sofia from his travels in France and Italy at the end of the 30s and even early 40s. He was on a royal scholarship. At that time there were, the king was providing scholarships to people of art to go travel in Europe and see the wonders of Italy and the galleries of Paris. And he took approximately 2 years trip in Europe, sending back long letters that were then published in a major cultural periodical at the time, and describing what he saw at the places he visited. The curious thing about his travel writing, though, is that, and again this is late 30s, there is not a single word there about the war that is already taking place in Europe at that time. He would only see art, the great Roman art, the great Renaissance masters, the great French contemporary at that time artists, and there is not a single word on the political situation, on the political disaster at the time. This is, I guess, also going to be one of the topics of discussion today as to our sensitivity towards the otherness, and what do we actually see when we look at a foreign place or a faraway place. Екатерина Петрова is before I introduce our guests today, these books here are not written by our guests today. this is a random selection from my home library of travel writings, or sort of travel writing. The reason why we don't have our guests' books to show is that Екатерина Петрова mainly uses digital media, and Dинко Телечан, although being an author of 5 poetry books and translator of more than 70 books, and author of 2 travel walks, hasn't brought any single physical book with him.
Sorry for that.
To show. And this is kind of unusual for a writer that has such a significant book production behind his back. Ekaterina is freshly back in Sofia from Iowa.
From Suzuki.
From Suzuki, okay, but and from Iowa. She, I don't know if you remember, there was one of the perhaps the first blog on Balkan travel writing. It was called Balkan Travellers. Perhaps some of you remember. She was editing it together with Albena Škodrova. Unfortunately, we cannot show it because it's not online any longer. But I remember very well the moment I discovered that blog, and it was it was a discovery for me. The quality of the writing there, and the fact that so Ekaterina was a contributor and editor at Balkan Travellers. She was also running a column at Capital White called Nešto Tarsacci. Nešto Tarsacci. And I'll let her perhaps translate that into English.
It's officially translated as turn-up stuffer, which it comes from Pippi Longstockings.
Yeah, I could imagine it comes from
turn-up stuffer.
And one can still find in the online edition of Capital, you can find her contributions there. And she's also running her own blog, The Ground Beneath My Feet, in English. Ekaterina is also a literary translator, and most recently she translates out of Bulgarian in English. The two of them, they haven't met today, neither yesterday. They actually, they will tell us more about this, I hope, but they used to share a flat in Kosovo, accidentally. In Kosovo, in Pristina, there is a residency program similar to ours, apparently with shared flats, not with the luxury setting that we offer here. So there were. I guess. Have you ever wrote anything about your Kosovo experience?
No.
Well, not so directly maybe about it, but you know, it's, in my case it is present in some of the things that I wrote, but it's not explicitly about Kosovo and Pristina.
Because it's not distant enough? Or?
Okay, straight to the point now. No, actually, if we talk about exoticism, and I guess it's going to be one of our topics this evening, in many ways Pristina is, from my perspective, and not only from mine, I believe, much more exotic than Thailand or China, for instance. And so it's not that it's not exotic, but there are some places on this earth where you can just arrive and be very happy about and see many things and so on, but being instigated or inspired to write is another thing. So, and it can also come after many years. I mean, this is what happens in my case very often. I just, the other day I happened to write about something that happened to me almost 20 years ago, because it just somehow shaped in my mind, or it created the impulse to write about it. Mm. So there's nothing wrong about Kosovo or Pristina as a place to write about.
You are also not inspired?
No, I was not inspired. I think my idea there to go was mainly to translate. So I did that. I did look very hard for this thing that I had, the turnip stuffer, which is always focused on one particular single object, and then I use that particular object to sort of try and tell a bigger story about the place. And I remember looking very hard for something to write about. And the only thing I found, which I just saw at my house, and I thought, oh, I haven't written that story, but I didn't, I guess, feel very inspired to write that story, was a rock that people give, like Rugova, when people were visiting heads of state, he was giving this rock, which comes from some mines, I think. This was the only thing I found, but I never wrote that story, I guess.
You mean people would give each other rocks as presents?
Yeah. Yeah. From a particular
But what is a special
mining
kind of rock, yeah.
area, yeah.
So since we are with that subject already, with starting from an object, you also have the sort of, I guess, the structure of your blog, of each entry in your blog. It always starts from that very, I'll just show you for those of you who haven't seen, but these are Ekaterina's feet at, this is, I guess, Christos floating piers. And this is the Sozopo that you just came from.
Yeah. I have a very similar picture from a few days ago.
So in this case, it's your feet that are keeping the whole thing together.
Yeah,
do you always need a particular object to start
I think with time, this is sort of some, I don't know, strategy or system that I developed, I guess. I was thinking, when I was trying to think a little bit about this conversation, and I was thinking about the kinds of travel logs or travel writing that I used to do, and how that's changed with time. I think when I first started out, I think the first travel log I ever wrote was about Bhutan, which is kind of maybe crazy place, and I just wanted to, you know, tell everything that I did there, that I saw there, that I learned about this country, and it was this kind of gigantic Wikipedia article in the end that I produced, maybe. And I think with time I find that less and less interesting to write, but also imagine it's not very interesting to read. So I sort of now try and focus, or have some very concrete focus from which then I spin out. So in the case of the blog, it's always, and I don't know, I think it started for a long time before I even started the blog. I would just take these pictures and then start doing research about the pavement, about, I don't know, and I think it's usually when you travel, you kind of look around and you look up. And that was, I guess, a way for me to maybe think about things that are less obvious. I also have this theory about Sofia's sidewalks, which are still pretty terrible, and that's why people are just, you know, they're always staring at their feet because they don't want to step on a broken tile and get splashed in rainwater.
And getting new shoes.
Yeah.
Every 3 months.
So yeah, I think with time
I think it was just me with my injured knee that I can
No.
It's everyone, yeah. Yeah, I guess in an attempt to maybe find less obvious stories and to have some very concrete structure that's specific enough but also open enough that I can use it in different, and it's the same with the blog and also with the turn-up stuff for stories. It's always this very specific object and there's always a picture of it, so you don't have to, because there's limited space when it was coming out in print, I don't have to spend time describing what this object looks like. It's already there and then I can just tell my story.
I guess we'll talk about the visuals, this combination later on, but okay, but you do shorter formats, shorter texts. Is that the same approach possible when, because Dinko is writing fully fledged books?
Not only that, but yeah.
But you don't. You told me you don't write journalism.
No, I don't do that. No, it's
and you're not on Facebook either.
When I'm not on social.
So short entries is not your.
I somehow see them as private writing. That it's maybe just a part of my character that I'm not willing to share these short things, or maybe just privately, but somehow I might be old-fashioned, and unless I have a whole, some bigger structure or something, I'm not willing to share it. But that's maybe just part of my. It's not my strategy. It's just as it happens. But I wanted to say about Ekaterina mentioned something that finally evolved into a big Wikipedia article. There's something that is now self-understandable that, but I'm not sure about the awareness that people who write about their journeys have, and it's something that actually might be very positive, although it's more frequent rather negative, because we are all aware that when we write, that most of the things that we want to describe the place, the objects and the history, geography and so on, can be found immediately, and anyone can do that. So this is what only 50 years ago, or even less, most of people, travel writers, their role was to be that. Yeah. So they were reporting, they were telling things that were difficult to find out, or you had to go to a library and to study it hard. So, but that might be a very positive thing, because if you omit all this stuff, then you might get true literature. Of course, if you can write well, but then you reduce your writing to the something that might be of a true interest.
This is, I think about this a lot also, how I guess the role of the travel writer has changed, and I imagine, 50 years ago, 200 years ago, it was quite, first of all, limited to who was doing it and how many people were doing it, but also this access to information, and I feel like with almost everyone, I guess, now being able to travel, and also everyone having access to information, I think the role of the travel writer has changed a lot, and this, we were talking a little bit about the kind of writing, travel writing that I like to read. I'm not really interested, if I learn something or I find out a fact along the way, that's great, but I'm very interested in this very subjective travel writing where the writer is very much present, but almost at the center of, the whole thing revolves around the writer. That's interesting to me. And that, I think, I lost my train of thought, I'm sorry.
That's perhaps the key difficulty also of writing.
Because I think it's also much more honest in a way, because you're always there anyway, even if you pretend you're not and you don't insert yourself in the story and you're saying these are the facts, but even by choosing, even if these are the facts, which sometimes they're not, but even if they are, by choosing to put in these 10 facts and ignore another 20 facts, you're always there. And I find this sort of first-person point of view, writing around the writer, I find that much more, I guess, honest.
And of course, this honesty is required, but on the other hand, if you have, if you go into privacy, to an extreme point, then you also lose any. I mean, it also loses any interest. So this balance, I think, is what is one of the difficulty in travel writing, because of course there is this first person, but you also have to something that, is, as you said, evolves, around this first person has to be visible at the same time. Mm-hmm. So to maintain this poise, this balance, I think that's somehow the secret of good writing. I mean, of travel writing that's worth reading in the first place, because why would I be attracted to someone's travel writing in the first place? I don't know the name, I know nothing, so what, or I might know the name, but somehow this name was developed. So what is actually that which attracts me to a travel book?
Well, that opens the question then, why are you reading it? What is your goal in reading? Are you reading to find out about a place? Are you reading to find out about, this particular person or their experience in this place? I think that's also something very briefly mentioned about keeping in mind maybe who your imagined audience is when you're writing, because sometimes you do have to say this example that you gave of your friend saying, oh, I don't like this because I don't know, it doesn't tell me how to get there, and it doesn't give specific directions.
Yeah, we're talking about a comment by a friend of mine who disliked a particular contemporary Bulgarian travel writer who writes about Bulgaria, his Bulgarian travels, because she says, I cannot find that place by myself. He has written a whole book about Rhodope mountain, and I cannot identify this particular places on the map. So, okay, apparently you are not writing for people who want to use your texts as lonely planets, rough guides, but then both as readers of travel writing, but also as writers, really, why do you think people read your stuff?
What do you mean, where they read it?
Why?
Why they read it?
I mean, the imagined reader, really, is there such a thing at all? Or?
Well, there is also this phenomenon of, that you mentioned, the popularity of travel writing is such, which is another topic too. So, of course, there may be various reasons. One is that, they're interested in a particular part of the world that you write about, or the previous work of the writer, or, well, whatever, I don't know. I think those might be the two main reasons, as far as I can see.
I can tell you why I read travel walks. I read travel walks because there are all these places that I would never be able to go to. One, or second, I've been to these places, but it's a sort of, I want to just see how to double check my perceptions as well.
My neighbor sorry for interrupting, but my neighbor is a quite extreme reader of travelogues, and recently he has told us that he prefers to read travelogues or watch travelogue series because he says, I'm an old person and I'm quite boring to myself. Mm-hmm. I don't want to travel. I want someone else's gaze on a place that I would never visit. It's much more interesting than what I'm going to see with my eyes. So, I think it's quite legitimate.
And it's more comfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the possible reasons.
I guess I read in two different modes. One is I read as literature, just, I sit at home in Sofia or wherever and I read. And I read it like I would read a novel or a collection of short stories. With this idea, I think not so much to find out information, but about, to find out maybe about this person just for language, And the other mode I read in is when I am traveling, a lot of the time I will read something that's written about this place. And I don't know, sometimes the one example I can think of I was reading, we can discuss or not discuss how great it is or bad it is, Eat, Pray, Love. when I was traveling around Bali.
You see, I forgot. I omitted it here. It's not here in that collection.
I thought most of it was a bit like, okay, personal search for meaning, and I don't know, which is fine. But I do remember learning actually things about, in one part of the book she says, first question people ask you is, where are you coming from? And the answer is not from Bulgaria. You say, oh, from the store, or from the beach, or from... So I knew how to answer that. And the second question is, are you married? And she says in the book, do not say, no, I'm not married. The answer is not yet. So I went around repeating, not yet, not yet. And, you know, people were like, yeah, soon it will happen. Don't worry. So I don't know, for little, practical things, and maybe to, like, see how my experience maybe is similar or not. Yeah.
Yeah, in this sense, in the sense perhaps of confirmation of your own experiences, or trying to see how other people formulate it. Then I found there was a book that was really revealing to me. I'm not sure whether it's translated into Bulgarian. I'm really sure it's a Barbarian in Asia, which I find one of the best books ever written about the topic. Henri Michaud, the poet. I mean, that was the reason why I took the book in the first place. I mean, his poetry. Anyway, but it's hard to say whether it's a travel book. It's about his journeys in Asia, and it's 70 years ago in some different context. And it's not about details of journeys, not even of places or people. It's just very universal, poetical sentences about his concentrated experience or summary of what he saw in Asia. And that was actually incredible. How even some very minute things were. I could recognize them and see them articulated in the way that perhaps I could not. So, but I saw the same experience, but written by a huge author, which I think Henri Michaud definitely is.
And I guess this, as you said, reading this also shapes your perception of the place.
Yes, of course. Although I read it afterwards. It was not that I read it before I went there, so I was not influenced by what I read. It was just that maybe my writing about it was shaped. But I think it's necessary because no writing without reading, right? just as in poetry or in any case. So, I mean, at least I think this old-fashionedly that it should be like that.
But since you are also readers, do you have your favorite travel authors? With all the knowing that when we say travel authors or travel writing on travelogues, it's rather tricky. How do we define the genre itself? Where do we put its borders? Whether so with all the uncertainties around the definition of what travel fiction is, do you have your favorite authors that you want to recommend to us?
Homer, for instance. I'm just half kidding because it's a topic that can be expanded to practically the whole of Western literature. Beginning from Homer, but what is Ulysses else than a travel book? What is Odyssey else than a travel book, and so on? But okay, let's narrow it to the genre. I just mentioned Henri Michaud, which for me is one of the most important books of that kind, but. In the same language, but from Switzerland, there is this writer called Nicolas Bouvier. Here it is, Употребата на света. This is, I think it's his first book, which also describes his journeys through more or less these regions. Serbia and Macedonia. Not sure where it started, but yeah.
Switzerland.
In Switzerland, yeah, sure. Anyway, he goes to
Through
India.
Yugoslavia, Turkey, Iran, Afghanistan to India.
So he meets Bulgaria.
It says Turkey.
From Yugoslavia to Turkey.
Yeah, well, anyway, but this book has not been so important for me. It is interesting, but it's the next one he wrote, and it's hard to call it a travelogue because it's about Sri Lanka, but not about the journey, it's about his stay there. So, because he ended up, after this, travel to the east, he settled actually in Sri Lanka, and he writes about the experience of being there, of trying to be one of the locals actually, because it was, which is also a huge topic. He tried not to be a tourist, which in his case was made easier by the fact that there were no other tourists. I actually saw the house where he stayed.
This is, sorry, which years? He's a contemporary.
It was in the 50s. And so he went to this little town in Sri Lanka where I happened to be twice, and I was looking for this house, which was the first guest house ever in that part of Sri Lanka, or in the country itself, I'm not sure. And of course he was a wonder there, and so on, and he tried to, you know, to become the part of the community, to eat like them, to work like them, and so on. And so actually the book is about that. It's called Poisson Scorpion, this kind of fish, scorpion.
Scorpion.
Fish, yeah. And so I'm not even sure whether it's justified to talk about it as a travel book, but that would be one of my favorites.
I think for a while I was really obsessed with Bill Bryson, of all people. And somehow I think I really enjoyed this, and it sort of gave me, I think, courage to, you know, the way he sort of did his research, gives you information, but very much inserts himself in the story, very much meanders, it's very subjective, and I think it sort of opened my eyes to this, that this could also be travel writing, and this is the travel writing, that kind of travel writing that I want to do, that, you know, sort of digresses. It doesn't have this, you know, this is the argument I want to make, or this, you know. So, and yeah, I think he sort of gave me the courage to start doing the Nešto Tърсач, this turnip stuffer thing. Recently I was thinking, I told you I was just at these writing seminars in Sozopol last weekend, and Kapka Kasabova was there, talking about her last book, Border, which in a way is a travelogue, with her also very much present in it, but also backed up with a lot of research, I think based on a lot of interviews with people that she carried out, and it's about the border between Bulgaria, Greece and Turkey, this triple border. And initially I was also interested, I read it kind of for my translation interest, because she leaves a lot of words as they are in one of the three languages. She wrote the book originally in English, but she leaves a lot of words in Bulgarian and Greek and Turkish. And that also is something I'm interested in, and I think like to do sort of, you know, leave words and then kind of follow this thread about where these words come from and how they're connected, and you know.
Is there also, okay, Kapka Kasabova, and what's the first, the name of the...
Bill
Bryson.
Bill Bryson. Is there a kind of a travel writing that...
I also really love Albena Shkodrova. I mean, this is ridiculous to say maybe, but yeah, I think also she's really obsessed with food, for example, so she always sort of spins her stories around food. And
Interesting.
yeah.
Good one.
Yeah.
Dinko's stories are around booze.
Around booze? it's not
You have Pakistani stories around non-existing booze.
non-existing booze.
No?
Yeah, I was just reminded of
Can
that.
that
Anyway,
be the connector, the underlying structure of the whole story?
yeah.
Food or booze?
I think so.
Yeah. Well, as you all know, the story is like, I mean, now it's the story dates back to 15 years ago, but the situation is more or less the same concerning the booze or the prohibition, because it's absolute there, so there's no way to find alcohol legally. So anyway, I stayed at my friend's house there in Islamabad, which was next to a Christian ghetto of the sort. I'm not sure they've been threatening to eliminate it these years. I'm not sure what will happen, and if it already happened. Anyway, they try to find different ways to find some alcohol, and this Christian ghetto also serves for that, because the only way for them to survive, because they're illegal as such, is to smuggle alcohol, vodka, whatever. I don't think drugs were involved. So although despised, all the good Muslims go to that place to find some alcohol, which is this kind of hypocrisy that we have in all directions. Anyway, one of those days while I was in Islamabad, a friend of my friend's parents, a fine elderly guy, came and to the house and saying very silently, and sort of conspiracy, "I have wine." And so everybody was amazed, of course, where did he get wine from? And it was, then he brought out this bottle with something looking strange, but he claimed it was wine, and we all had to try it. It was, of course, horrible, but well, the thing that, drinking wine in Pakistan was, like a part of conspiracy. So he told me that what he did was buying grapes and reading about how to produce wine, and then in the cellar of his house he somehow managed to make this kind of, let's say, wine. So that's the booze story. Although I think there are more interesting stories from Pakistan, especially going from Pakistan to India. Yeah.
Okay, but
and it's also about about the difference between for a traveler, also for a tourist, it's a huge difference between two apparently very similar countries in terms of being a traveler there in India
Pakistan
and in Pakistan. Yeah. They're almost like two archetypes. Although I guess it will also change, like everything else. But being there, I mean, in Pakistan, then as well as now, I guess, is an experience of how it might be to travel through India, I don't know, 100 years ago, because you are not. People are not used to have you as a source of. Curiosity and income and everything, and I will not say that I haven't found some genuine hospitality in India. Of course I did, but it's influenced by the whole touristic mode. So actually I spent a great time there, invaluable. I was of course privileged to stay in a nice house, at my friend's house, so it's a different thing. And
does it mean that you both travel just you travel for the purpose of writing about that? Or you travel for other reasons, and then this is a side effect?
Yeah, for me.
That you just cannot stand still and...
Definitely a side effect, I think.
Yeah, for me too.
I mean, I know you don't
I
live...
started writing quite late and then tried to write about these places that I had been to 5 years ago, 10 years ago, based on pictures, based on, I don't know, people that I knew there, so contacted and asked questions. But yeah, I guess I don't really travel with the purpose of writing.
Yeah, I guess in our part of the world, there are virtually no professional travel writers.
Yeah,
I mean, there are
can-
TV journalists who are
Maybe,
Well,
Well, in
doing
Croatia
this
there are
for
a
living?
couple of professional travel writers. It's a very superficial writing, but this is why they are professional,
ah,
because it's widely read.
yeah.
And it's just, you know, one of those collectors of trophies. You know, I've been to 120 countries, which I don't know why, but it's still a fact, which is just for that very fact they are interesting for a wide audience.
Since you brought that subject, is there what kind of travel writing that you find you really despise or you cannot?
Let us rather
you
admire
think
and
that
not
it's better
despise.
not to be published at all. Is there anything that really annoys you in perhaps without quoting names, but I can
Yeah,
tell you, for example, I wrote this, the very first book over there is on Kurdistan with the horrible title,
This one?
yes, 1,000 Sights, 1,000 Revolts, Journeys in Kurdistan. This is from 20 years back, or 15 years.
So this is an example of bad writing.
Yeah, this is a horribly exoticizing, superficial, romanticizing Kurdish culture,
But
American or British, I don't know, but Anglophone gaze on Kurdistan.
But that would be an answer to your question, I believe. You know,
I just wanted to push you more into
I mean, what
into
can
the
annoy
hate mood.
What annoys me is bad writing, nothing else. You know, not a specific strategy of writing or anything else. It's just, you know, bad writing, just as in novels or poetry or anything else. So it doesn't matter which country is the subject or for how long and has somebody been somewhere and how intensive were those experiences and so on, but how he or she treated the experience. So it's bad writing, nothing else.
Because you mentioned that writer who spent 3 days in China.
Yeah, that sounds almost like it. I have to check it, but I think it's not a joke. It's an American who spent 3 days in Beijing, not only Beijing,
Of course
then
you
wrote
can-
a book about it called China Yesterday, Today, Tomorrow.
One for each day.
Well,
Sure, and I mean, yeah, he was not lying, of course. So, but theoretically, it can also
it's
be
legitimate.
an interesting book. Why not?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm 3 days there, but I'm, you know, I write so well and I'm so much into it and so on that I can really, you know, write 300 pages out of my 3 days. Why not? I mean, you have this classical example of the book called Voyage or Journey Around My Room, yeah, which was really which was really written in a room. The author is called Xavier de Maistre, not to be confused with Joseph de Maistre. And he was confined, actually. It was not that he locked himself in his flat just to write about it, but it was I don't really remember exactly. It was like a home prison, so he just decided to write a kind of parody, you know, and to show that it's not, you don't necessarily have to travel around the globe to write something very interesting, but you can just sit and stay in your room and write a very interesting travelogue, which he actually did. I wrote it, and I can remember the book as a
It's not
travelogue.
translated into Bulgarian, is it?
It's in English. I was wondering why the name Bruce Chapman hasn't come up yet. You know Bruce Chapman,
Yeah.
who wrote the book In Patagonia, because that seemed to totally renovate travel writing, at least in the English-speaking world.
Yeah.
That one book. And then I was thinking then the less exotic one, you had translated Cortázar, his book about being on the autoroute to the south.
On the
The autoroute on the Cosmonaut.
That's great.
Autopista, no.
That's traveling on the high-speed
Where he was
road to the
traveling
south.
with his wife.
From Paris to Marseille.
Yeah, that one. Those two are like two books that somehow renovated the whole world of travel writing.
Yeah.
But
I
then-
just thought of another favorite, which I think she's a fiction writer, normally Jane Diskey, I think her name is, and she has a great book called Meeting Strangers and Smoking with Interruptions on Trains, which I thought was really
All that is style.
Yeah. She passed away a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I forgot to mention actually. Sorry, I totally forgot to actually introduce you properly.
Okay, let's
But talking about book titles,
yeah.
Dinko is perhaps primarily not a travel writer, but
No.
mostly a poet. And travel writing comes second or even third in your.
I don't have a strict hierarchy.
But he's also a literary translator, and Cortázar was mentioned because he translated Cortázar into Croatian, thank you, and also a number of other demanding authors, and some less demanding ones. But the title of his two travel books are on India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and China.
Asia mostly.
His first travel book is entitled Łotos, prach i mak. To je na chorvatskom.
Yeah.
So Łotos, dust
and poppy.
And poppy. And which can easily be turned into. Also, we can play a bit around that.
There are very funny puns with this title.
Some people forget the original title,
which you can
play around with.
You can even hear or understand. So it's Lotus, Prah and Mrak, and I'm saying Lotus, Prah and Mrak, but then it can be Kokos, Strach i Prach, Kokos, Topos, Strach i Mrak, and so on. Yeah, okay.
Užas, prach i...
Strava je užas.
And the second one?
And the second one is called Azijska suita. Do I pronounce it correct? Asian suite. And what is interesting about this second book of his is that it is apparently the composition of it follows the composition of the Renaissance suite. And we were talking about Ekaterina's approach to her composition, to her underlying structure around an object. But Dinko took a formal approach, right? Or not that much. So why do you structure a travel book on Asia using a European musical,
something very
European
Western,
musical form,
very
yes.
Western,
Yeah.
and ancient Western. This is the paradox that I wanted to have. The first thing was, you always this kind of writing, because travel writing tends to be a sort of diary or a collection of fragments and so on, which you try then to, if you want to publish it or show it to anybody, you try somehow to gather them, to give them a kind of shape. So I try to, or shape or composition, right? So it just crossed my mind that since it's all about the East and Asian experiences and so on, I thought about musical forms, and the music is a very important part of what I was writing about. And also when I think about composition, somehow naturally I always think about music. And and I wanted to get something which is furthest possible from the tradition or the part of the world that I was writing about. And then somehow I remembered the structure of suite, which is 5 or 6, it depends, movements. Actually those movements are forms of dance, Renaissance dances. And each of them has a specific mood and a specific pace, tempo, and so on. And somehow I realized that those different parts of the book actually do have their own moods, which do somehow, although it might sound very artificial, and I'm aware of that, but somehow they fit it into different movements. And I also introduced this motif of dance and dancers dancing, not only as a metaphor but also through dancing scenes. And somehow it just, I got this more or less successful, not for me to judge, suite composition.
Which readers do not detect, though.
No, most of them. But
the title gives it away.
It does, but most of the people are confused with this suite. But which suite? Come on. I was even attacked by a musicologist, which I didn't expect, saying, "Yeah, you're very right. It's about this. It's exactly the names of the movements are correct and so on, and the mood and so on. But you're writing about Asia. It cannot be there." Then I said, "Yeah, of course. This is what I really wanted to. So well."
But in general,
it can be read. It's just a matter of structure, so it can be read without all these references.
But would you recommend? You don't do that. You haven't done that in your other writings.
No.
Like taking a formal structure. In general, would you? How does that help? Would you recommend it to other? Also, your strategy.
I wouldn't recommend any strategy to anybody. I mean, no recipes. And I always try to find something else, to conceive some other way of structuring, organizing the material that I have. So it's always a question, and I don't have answers. I have temporary answers. This is what I have. So I cannot recommend it. I just can recommend, reading.
Yeah, you already recommended to us to read other people's books.
Perhaps I sound like a professor, but which I don't want to, but I really think it's necessary.
No, but perhaps you have tried things that you then realized they don't work.
Sure. And
you found a better way, and you can sort of,
Yeah, actually.
Of course, everybody's entitled to make his own mistakes.
Yeah, of course.
So perhaps we all have to make our own mistakes. And
mistakes are useful, and if you can get over them, especially if you put a lot of effort into a mistake, it can be frustrating. For instance, this is how I spent 3 weeks in Sri Lanka last time I was there. I was obsessed with the idea of writing a play.
On Sri Lanka?
Which would take place in Sri Lanka. So it was so old-fashioned. I went there with the idea that I would be inspired with all the surroundings and so on, and I will have the characters there, and everything would take place in various Sri Lankan localities and so on. And so I just spent 3 days writing this play, which in the end was a disaster. Completely unsuccessful, and it just didn't function like a play. But then I realized that it can be quite a good cycle of poems. It can sound strange, but somehow it just converted, from I stopped thinking as a playwright and then put it into verses and some other stuff. So yeah.
So what's the moral that sometimes when it doesn't work in one genre, then we...
It's okay to fail.
It's okay to fail. Very simple moral. It's okay to experiment and to try to find other solutions each time.
Katya? About writing strategies?
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, I'm also reluctant to say, yeah, do this. Different things work for different people. Maybe, yeah, related to this thing about trying to write about travels that I've done years and years ago. I think also in a way this blog came out as sort of this kind of freedom and desire, and I would do things very quickly and I would take pictures without any pressure, like, this has to be published, and then in a way it sort of serves as a record for me and as note-taking for me. I mean, it's, I guess, a bit more public than that, and there's actually overlap, so I would have these stories on the blog and then I would write the turn-up stuff or things which are to be published, but I would use a lot of things that I, just as a record, I guess. So, yeah, I guess for a long time because I think when you travel, you think like, oh, this is amazing, I'm never going to forget this, and then, 2 weeks go by and you forgot everything, or a lot of it,
names and details.
So, yeah, I guess everyone comes up with different ways of keeping records and taking notes, and I'm a terrible note taker, so I just take pictures as notes, I guess.
Which is legitimate too, why not? I'm not sure I know any writer who would really go somewhere with the aim of writing a travelogue. I mean, a serious writer. I know a few people who earn their living by writing about places, but I guess that's not what we are discussing here. This kind of guides, or there is a Croatian, I don't know how to call him. Let's say he's a writer who actually tries to imitate, the gonzo journalism, and which he conceives as going from place to place, since he has a lot of money, inherited money, and he just spends 2 days in a city. So he's been to all the countries in the world, and he writes about it. And he writes it very badly. But the strange thing is, it's popular.
China yesterday, today, and tomorrow.
Yeah. No, it's not even 3 days in Beijing, it's only 2 days. And then he gets drunk, and then he moves to Shanghai, and then to Thailand, and so on. But, I guess it's still this, we haven't touched so much on the notion of exoticism and so on, but still it's somehow interesting and so on. Then we also have this topic of the fact that somebody traveled to a distant place is still something interesting.
Yeah, I actually just in a while, I will open for questions and comments by the audience, but perhaps a last question from me. There is this big topic about the gaze, the external gaze, the way we talk about the other, and how we see the other, and who is the other.
And is there the other?
And of course the whole centuries-long or more recent conversation and post-colonial conversation, but on the background of, each one of us can be accused of having a colonial gaze, so to speak, of not getting it right, of omitting to notice, of perhaps even being racist, in a subversive, so somewhere deep in ourselves. But since we are here in a East European setting, and after all, you're writing, you are also East Europeans, post-socialist people, coming from, and I was wondering if, in a way, since this part of the world has been an object of exoticism, of being exoticized by West Europeans, let's say, historically, but also nowadays, it has also been through self-colonialism in a way. And it's, after all, still experiencing itself as being peripheral. Does that give us, does that give us any comparative advantage? Does that make any difference, the fact that we come from that position of a periphery that has been an object of description?
That might be an advantage for sure. But before answering that question, I would also like...
And also, how do you feel about this whole, this whole issue of ethical, all the ethical problems that writing about the other races? Or you say, it's my personal experience, full stop,
Yeah, I also don't think we should exaggerate with that and carry necessarily and correctly this burden of white men and so on, which is necessarily there, of course, but if it gets too far, I think it just blocks any attempt at writing about anything that's out of one's backyard, you know. So it should be carried in mind, but maybe not, you know, just that's also just one kind of discourse that I think maybe which has become self-understood and as a form of political correctness, which, okay, we won't discuss now, but make some people and even some writers guilty without true reason. I mean, I necessarily must admit that I don't I don't think I have to carry the collective burden of the white man, which necessarily is the life form which is the most damaging in the history of the world. Being white man, I mean, there's no doubt about it. But on the other hand, I mean, I don't have to bring it into all my writing and thinking and seeing the world. But in connection with that, since we talk about good authors and good travel writing, I forgot to mention, and I think it's very important, the work of Victor Segalen. And it has to do with this because especially not only his writings about China, which is mostly poetry actually, but also very important essay he wrote, which is called The Exoticism. And where he tried to define this term in a kind of positive way, although already in his time it was something rather trivial and rather, you know, blasé and so on, and it was immediately after Gauguin and the whole disappointment related to it, and some kind of escape from the petit bourgeois setting of decadent France and Western Europe and so on. So I think his view of the exoticism is something very fresh and something worth attention. But it's just me talking.
But the two of you seem to differ in that, don't you?
I guess
Katerina was.
Well, you must be different, yeah.
I don't think fundamentally we differ. Yeah, maybe a little bit more. I think about it a lot. It makes me very nervous.
The photo on our Facebook event made you very
We had a
nervous,
discussion,
understandably so.
Yeah.
And I feel
Maybe some of you came because of that really nice photo from India. Because sorry for interrupting, but I used it for marketing purposes. But also it's really problematic that we use that photo, and that's what the photo Katerina is talking about.
Yeah, and I think maybe out of this nervousness, sort of my maybe cop out in a way is to become very, not navel gazing but feet gazing. I kind of, look at myself and very forcefully insert myself in the story. I think as consciously or unconsciously trying to, this othering. I feel like if I'm there somehow more than this othering or this exoticization of the other somehow is lessened. Yeah, I don't know if I have the other thing which you sort of raised, this issue of if we're in sort of a more easier position, maybe because we are from the Balkans, we're not American, we're not I don't know, English, we're not
We have
French.
less guilt.
Yeah, French, I don't know. I think we talked about this in a way that when I'm traveling with people or I have friends visiting me here and they start saying благодаря and Marjolina Bira, and just like, just speak in English, it's okay. And then they say this is a sign of respect for the place, and in a way I travel around the world and I just speak English and kind of expect everyone to speak English, but it's very different than I do it kind of with ease because I'm not American, because I learned English as a second language, and I feel like, I'm not, this American person going around the world expecting everyone to speak English. I'm a Bulgarian going around the world expecting everyone to speak English, yeah. But yeah, I don't know if I have any answers except to say that it makes me very nervous. This is also why I think I so tightly grip to, an object. And of course there is always a danger of unconsciously, having biases. But these are my, I guess, little ways of sort of maybe trying to, yeah.
But there are people in your stories as well, not just subjects. There are other people, I mean.
There are people in my stories, but this is also, I realized that I don't think I've traveled anywhere in recent years, or maybe ever, where I wasn't visiting friends. I don't really travel to go to a place. I guess I travel to visit people, and I think already maybe this gives you, like what you were saying, some sort of like maybe less touristy thing if you're staying with somebody. I don't know, I ask a lot of questions. I don't know. This was not very useful.
I guess the direct. But then you were still annoyed by the picture of the typical Indian cliche picture as Sadhu.
Yeah.
From his back, skinny person, probably in front of the Ganges River. Is that the or some other place?
It's not near the Ganges, but I mean.
But you can.
It could be.
Yeah, one can imagine there is the Ganges River and the Sadhu.
Actually, he's in the middle of the city, which makes it's not so so frequent, but not important either. But okay, let's have this conflict.
Yeah, I mean, I said this. It made me very nervous. This man from, no face.
But your problem was that it was from behind.
From behind. Well, that's and it's this brown-skinned man with dreadlocks taken from the back. Obviously, this was not. We talked about this. It doesn't make for very good pictures to go around and ask people, and they're like, yes. It's artistically maybe not very interesting, but this man then becomes this, I don't know, thing, this like.
But any man becomes a thing when you make a photo of anybody in the street.
I thought about for a long time why it makes me so uncomfortable, and I thought, what if it was a picture of a, I don't know, Swedish guy? And first of all, there would be no picture of a Swedish guy like this. I think, first of all.
But how does a typical Swedish... the problem is with the typical...
Yeah, but the problem is...
No, the problem is that we feel in a privileged position.
But also, what is this? I think also when we're talking about, you said everyone has a picture like this from India, so let's not have 50 more, you know, they're already...
Well, that's a good one, still.
But then it's my picture of the Satgo in India.
Yeah.
It's my travel log of my...
I'm also not a very good photographer, so I always know if I take pictures of whatever, the Eiffel Tower or the
Taj Mahal,
whatever. There's going to be a million pictures which are better. So this is, I think I tried to take a picture that, you know, nobody else is going to take a picture of my feet. I don't know.
Yeah, this is why it's good, and I like this. Although it involves also the psychology of looking into your feet, but still as artwork, it's very fine.
You have pictures in your book.
I do.
Because maybe some readers want to see the Taj Mahal.
But that was a sort of compromise, actually.
Compromise from
on
your part?
With the publisher.
So the publisher insisted on...
So, because in my first book there are a couple of photographs, which are, some of them are not even mine, because I had this idea, I was obsessed with trying not to be a tourist, so I didn't even have a camera. Which was great, actually. Except that, of course, I saw amazing things, and then I had this urge to shoot it, but you know.
That's why you write travel logs, because you cannot shoot.
No, but after that I brought my camera, and of course I made some photos and so on. But discussing this stuff with my publisher, he asked me about the photos, because it's somehow expected to show these exotic scenes. And I said, I would rather not, because I think I'm trying to write seriously about these things, and if it cannot be covered with a text, then it's somehow insufficient, and I don't want it that way. I don't want, you know, another popular guide through India and I don't know what. But then, you know, we had a lot of discussions, and he said, please do that, because I have to sell the book. Because when, you know, they will realize, they will know your name or not, but they will realize, okay, it's a travel book. The first thing they will do is, okay, and the photos? Oh, nothing. Okay. Let's go on. So, it was a compromise. Although I think there are a couple of good photos, but maybe for something else, an exhibition or whatever, or a projection, that is, which people also like.
Speaking about photographs,
yeah.
From my own experience in Bulgaria, during the communism, when you came from the West, you were told that there were certain things you weren't allowed to take pictures of. There's a whole long list: train stations, bridges, certain public buildings. But then, in personal experience, I still remember being on Risto Botev and taking a picture of a woman in '68. She had a scale and she was charging money to weigh themselves in front of the Aline Feline bookstore. And this policeman started yelling at me, "You're not supposed to take pictures like that." No. It was just a woman, you know, it was a cute picture, but obviously they didn't want that to be seen outside of Bulgaria. And then in 2010, my wife was walking on Solonska, I believe it is, just before just before Vitosha, and she saw in front of a jewelry store a doll on the ground. So she stepped back and took a picture of the doll, at which point the men all around started screaming at her, "How dare you!" And she couldn't tell whether they were like just guys out making trouble, but I realized that people do react to picture taking in some way, you know, and you know, just a doll on the, you know, it's strange to see a doll on the sidewalk with a, who knows why, but people get very annoyed, you know, and so that's maybe the reason not to have pictures in travel books, you know, just let the words stand for themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess taking pictures could be dangerous in some places. Still. Is there, I guess there are other travel writers.
Travel writers.
Or travel writers to be.
Or travel writers to be. Or
travelers.
Or travelers. Or scholars researching travel writing.
Yeah, but Kukoleva's book's going to be published in a few days, travelogue. So you can share it.
Something can happen and result in not having a book. I don't know, I'm not sure. But in terms of the pictures, I have a different point of view. Because even if you said that the text should be enough, should be beautiful enough.
Mm-hmm.
But I think exactly the contrast between the fact that the picture is very usual, for instance, it's not exotic, and the text is very beautifully written, it can create something together that is...
So you mean the combination of bad pictures and the good writing makes this good writing even better?
Even that, yes, because this contrast, this difference between the reality and your perception of the world can add a different layer to in the eyes of the viewer, the reader.
Possible, but still if you see a picture and the text at the same place, since picture is usually more immediate, you know, it will define your reading the text, which I think does harm to the text. This is why I think I would rather avoid it.
For me,
especially nowadays that we have this, you know, domination of the visual.
It all depends on the pictures, I think. If it's some classical picture, if it's Taj Mahal, maybe it's, but pictures can be rather different. They can be details. You cannot even understand from which country it comes.
Yes, of course.
So it can be a form of art as well, if it's made.
Your found object. The object, this little broken statue.
Oh yeah.
Do you want to tell a bit about this?
Yeah, well, that's something that...
Because she's, I guess, talking about this kind of pictures, not the cliche images of...
Yeah, this is something that I was really happy to make a photo of. But that's some thing that can be both described and photographed. Anyway, it was really like a small miracle. I was walking. It was in Thar desert, on the verge of the desert. In Rajasthan, in India, and with really nothing, you know, just some low grass and mostly sand and dunes and so on, all the typical stuff. And further you go from the settlement, you just lose sight of anything. And it was, you know, I walked for 2 hours and then lost sight of anything, nothing, you know, civilized or human or whatever in the settlement. Then I saw something in the sand, which was really curious because it was dark and everything was, you know, glistening in the sun, very brilliant with all this bright yellow of the sand and the bright blue of the sky, and in the middle of that there was something almost black. And I approached and I saw this small statue, which was broken. It was a Hinduist figure, this big, like my palm, without a head and without hands, like the old antique Greek statues. And it was there in the middle of nothing, and I could just invent 10 stories about how it ended up there. But, you know, and it was made of very nice, sort of black marble or such a thing. So not a cheap statue, and it was just, yeah, it was there. And I was very happy to make a photo of that.
Did you
leave it there?
And I have it, yeah. I mean, I can show it to you, but...
But did you leave the statue there, or did you take it?
It's also something that I was thinking about.
His living room in Zagreb, no?
Yeah, it's in my living room. Because I thought there are arguments for both leaving it there and for taking it, you know.
Sure.
And I guess I don't have to expose on that. But I decided to take it. Because I'm a white colonial man. So I just take it and then put it in a museum and I earn a lot of money.
Questions, comments, pictures.
Dinko, I ask you a question. Why does that great book about Yugoslavia called by Rebecca West, you know, black sheep, white wolf, no, white sheep, black wolf, one of those. Why does it survive, even though Yugoslavia doesn't survive?
Why does the book survive?
Her book survive.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't read her books, so I cannot judge about that. But I guess, I mean, books about the ancient Greece still survive, although we don't have that country anymore. So I guess Yugoslavia is perhaps not that interesting, but still, I mean, why not?
Yeah, because it's constantly still in print, and they reprint it, you know, all the time, and because of a prose style, maybe.
Yeah, I really cannot judge that style, but if it's well written, I guess it's one of the reasons.
Favorite travel writers that we forgot to mention?
We could talk also about traveling inside the head, right? So that, for instance, with drugs, doors into perception, fear and loathing on Las Vegas.
Sure, the Snow Leopard, for instance, we could mention also.
Oh yeah, well, Michaud too, he spent much of his life traveling in the world of drugs.
Sure, then there is a great author called Kenneth White,
Yes.
whose style of writing is very interesting, and he's also been, I don't know if he's translated into Bulgarian. I think he's the inventor. He's the inventor of this term of geopoetics.
Yeah.
After whom a publisher in Belgrade is also called. Yeah. So yeah, there are many interesting names. We don't have to exhaust all this, everything.
Can we perhaps take some time today to listen to your beautiful story about the passport?
I think everyone's tired, no?
No. Do you wanna? Are you tired?
I mean, what are they going to say? Yes.
Is it 8 already?
It's 8.
Ah, it's 8. Okay.
But it's
What kind of moderator are the people with time?
perhaps also an illustration, because we've been talking very abstractly about the notion of travel writing.
Yeah.
So maybe.
But it's very long to read. I mean, people can read it if they would like.
Maybe the beginning of the story. First 2 paragraphs and
then we leave us.
yeah.
Very interesting. I know. I mean, it's online in Bulgarian.
We were planning to.
It's maybe also interesting to say that this story was published in this book. And when I was invited to contribute an essay for this book, which is about traveling and migration and home and immigration, and I really didn't know where to start and where to start, where to go. And so my strategy also in this case was to find a very concrete object, which was my first passport issued when I was 4 years old, and then spin a sort of bigger, it's very tragic picture. You can show the passport, I think. If you scroll down, it's very tugging at the heartstrings. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, from this very specific object, I used, you know, kind of to like tell my own, I guess, story about migration, but it's also interesting to look at this passport where things are in, I guess, French and Russian and Bulgarian, and now everything's in Bulgarian and English, and I don't know, just...
Why is the validity 1 year only?
Because children change very fast at that.
But also, I don't know, I think just to restrict things. And I looked at, you know, the back cover of the passport. There's all these rules about how you have to return it within whatever, 2 weeks or a few days after getting back into the country. So yeah, that was my...
It's a beautiful text, and the whole collection, говорят about me, in case you haven't come across it, it's really beautiful collection of texts by some of them by non-writers. By people who are not.
And it's going to be translated into English.
Yes. Yeah. So, talking about your first, just one last question. Is there a place that you've been to, except apart from Kosovo, that you wanted to write about and you haven't written about for some reason? That something sort of blocked you, stopped you? And I'm not talking about reasons such as I didn't have time, or I had to marry, or...
Actually, today I was just reminded of a sort of recommendation by Daniel Kish, great writer, who said once that a writer should not write about a city where he or she spent less than six months. Which I think in a way is quite true, but it's, of course it's very rigid and strict, but I think it's a good recommendation. In this relation, well, the city where I spent much more than 6 months, apart from the cities in the country where I'm from, and it's Cordoba in Spain, where I spent a beautiful year.
And you have great stories from there.
Of course, there are stories from there, but which I used, but not in a way that I would write about, as a traveler, as a, what Spain and Cordoba or whatever city in Spain. So, but somehow it always finds its way through, into a line, a verse, a paragraph of what you write. It's present. It doesn't have to be explicit. So.
I don't know. I can't think of one, I guess.
You didn't.
I've written everything I wanted to.
You've written about. You haven't left a place undescribed.
I think it might be interesting to write about Iowa, and it was very interesting for me to go back to
because
the American
it was more than 6 months.
It was 2 years, yeah. But also this kind of return again, a story of a return to a place that I feel very connected to, and it's some sort of a home, and to go back 15 years later, but I think it needs to sit for a while.
Yeah, that's also important.
The story of return is quite interesting. I have a friend who is a great traveler. He traveled all over the world, and he was twice in India for a year. And the first time when he was there, he lived in a small village. And when he decided to leave, he chose a shortcut, but it was a very unstable bridge. And they were telling him that not to cross the river there, but let's say 50 kilometers to the south. But he crossed, and after he crossed the river, the bridge collapsed. Yeah. 4 years after that, he went to the same village to see it in India, and on his way there, he was walking. He met some other guy who told me, where are you going to, whatever village? And the guy said, oh, they have a very interesting story there about a white god. it was said that their bridge would be built 3 times, and 3 times it would fall. But after the white guy cross it and it falls, they will build it and it would never fall again. So he was respected there and met with all these honors as a white god in this village. So the return stories might be quite surprising for you.
Yeah.
Be careful. You might not
how
be...
are you being remembered?
Yeah.
I did write.
How are you being described by the locals as well?
Yeah, that's also a good perspective. I did write about my first unsuccessful attempt to travel. That was when I was 8. And I was inspired by literature, which is Jules Verne and his voyage to the center of the world. And, of course I wanted to do the same thing. So that was supposed to be my first voyage, and I was very serious about it. And I was aware that I need some assistance, and so...
And equipment.
No, money. I was still quite idealistic at the time. So I just persuaded a friend of mine from school to read the same book, which was not easy. But he read it eventually, and he liked it, and so we were about to find the spot where we will start our journey. So where we will start digging, which we did, and it was not too far from the school playground, and after we did that, the strategy was to dig every day and then to cover it, because we saw it in the Western movies, you know, the grass patch, which you just then put on after you to cover it. And we were very, very persistent about it. I think it lasted for a week, and it was more than 1 liter, I think. But then came the huge disappointment, because this friend of mine came to me and said, I think I'm going to give this up. I'm not sure that we will go to the center of the world, to the center of the earth. And I said, well, what do you mean? I mean, we just have to, you know, be persistent, and it's going to work. And no. And so, well, I said, well, I'll do it alone, but 1 more week after that, I surrendered, and that was one of these early disappointments in my life. But I wrote about it, and so, well.
This will make a travel.
Which of course opens a whole new topic that I suggest we leave for informal setting, about traveling by yourself or the need of travel companions. Which in your case, your travel companions have left you in the middle of the road. And whether it makes a difference.
Yana, excuse me. I would like to say one more name of traveler and journalist, which is Ryszard Kapuściński. I was very impressed with
Kapuściński, of course, yes.
He's mixed journalist, traveler, political analyzer, historian. Many things.
The Polish.
Yeah, no. I was also reminded in the meantime of a fantastic book by, never sure about the pronunciations, Kees Notenboom. You know, right, the Dutch novelist. I mean, he's a fiction writer, more or less. C-E-E-S, Notenboom, who is very refined and sophisticated fiction writer, and so but he used to earn his money a long time ago by writing guides, not travel, just guides. And he's always very self-ironic about it, and so on. So this was his attempt, and I think very successful one, to write true, you know, full-blooded literary travelogue, and it's about Spain. And the title is, I just managed to forget it, but I'll recall it. Yeah. And what he did was to find a place to find places which are far from all the cities that everybody would expect to be written about, like Alhambra or Madrid or Sevilla and so on. Those are very tiny places with some spots that he is obsessed with because he's been there many, many times, and it's a great prose writing. So another recommendation. Notable.
He has a novel about Bulgaria too. He has a novel set in Bulgaria. It's an early novel.
Set in Bulgaria.
It's set in Bulgaria.
Do you remember the
First
title?
World War. I'll look it up in a moment.
Let's continue informing us.
Yeah, okay, let's move on. No, it's
It's a different.
not 8, but no. 2 O's. No. T-E-V-O-O. Yeah, here.
Okay.
A fantastic place. Really
Okay.
warmly recommend.
Okay. Bibliography. And the book on Bulgaria is a travel,
It's a
right?
novel.
No,
A
it's
novel.
I'll find it in a second for you.
And now here we have all the Dutch titles. Bitter Bolivia.
Song of Truth and Semblance. There it is. It's
Rituals is, for me, one of his best novels.
Uh-huh.
I'm sure it must be, some of it must be translated into Bulgarian. I know usually there are not many Dutch translators. I mean translators.
We have at least 2. So
Yes.
3.
3. Well then, I mean, he would be one of the first options, I guess, among the contemporary writers. Okay.
Yeah, well, since you mentioned Kapuściński, that. Okay, well, Ekaterina left as well. Yeah, maybe perhaps time was running much faster than I expected. Since we cannot read Dinko in any language for the time being, we can read.
Well, you have the text.
Yeah, that's what I wanted.
This is a small.
There is a small text in English.
Actually,
Yeah, no more than
it's an essay, but it has to do with a travel experience too.
Thank you.
And as of today, we can read some of Dинко Телечан's poetry in Bulgarian in today's literary newspaper.
We can finish in your style as Unfinished Symphony by Haydn. Everybody's leaving one by one.
Yeah, sure.
Well, thank you, our only left panelist.
It's good that we still have a moderator though.
This is what happens to me all the time, digging the earth and, having discussions, so, I know where to go. But, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And thanks to Yana. And to the next page.
And to
And
the
this is
Duki
not-
network that
this is not,
brought us together.
this is not just courtesy, it's really been, it's been a great pleasure. And beautiful circumstances here, so something a writer can only wish for, any writer.
You came back.
I thought we were done.
Yes, we are done.
We were-
Thank you again, you missed
We've
the...
been waiting for the final word from you.
Thank you.
I guess we can stay around for a while, as usual. But a while. With a stress on a while.